Happy New Year. How is everybody doing? I am doing great. How was your guys' holidays, I celebrated Christmas at my mom's house and it was very nice. I spent 2 days there. And for New Year's, my brother invited me and my dad to go visit a friend of his and spend like New Year's at their house. And it was very fun. I ended up staying there till like 3 a.m. It wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. Towards the end of last year, I participated of the trend of like compiling all your year's work into this like graphic, and you can see the trajectory you took that year, and I was really excited, and I did it, and honestly, when I looked at it, I wasn't too happy with it. I'm gonna be completely honest. I wasn't too happy with it, which is interesting because this year I would say was very fruitful. It was a very good year. But when I look at this graphic, I wasn't too happy with it because I didn't feel like I challenged myself to do a lot of big pieces or very impressive pieces. I felt that in 2024 I had a lot of pictures that told the story, that had a narrative, had some sort of like lighting challenge, had some dynamic thing. And then this year, I felt that I played very safe. And I whined for a bit, for like 10 minutes. And then I decided, no, I'm not gonna sit around and cry. I'm not gonna be whining. I'm not gonna piss on my pants. I am going to take action. Something that I love doing and that I wanted to do was more background work. More, like I just said, pieces that told a story, that had a narrative, had a feeling, had lighting, had these big things going on, right? And so as January starts rolling in, I remember, I do commissions every month. At the beginning of the month, I start opening them, and these commissions are themed, and I came up with a theme of a water park. I'll explain the reasoning later, but I also decided that these commissions that I was going to make were going to be different. I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing last year was vertical, like portraits or profiles. And this year I decided I wanted to do some more wide work. I wanted to work on more horizontal pictures that allow me to draw a scenery, because the vertical pictures, they feel sometimes very crammed. There's not much space for me to work and make a composition out of it. And I wanted to do very composition heavy pictures, and so that's the direction that I went. So explaining the theming of the water park. Right now here in Brazil, it's really, really hot. It's summertime and the temperature can go up to like 35 degrees. It's hell. It's really burning up, and that inspired me to do a piece that was cooling. It felt very summery and it felt very warm, but also was refreshing, which is ironic because I know most of my audience is out there in the United States, and it's winter time there right now, so me making a summery theme feels very clashing. But global warming. Global warming, yeah. I'm always trying to tie back the themes that I have to FNAF, since most of my audience, once again, is tied to Five Nights at Freddy's, and it's also a huge focus of mine. I love Five Nights at Freddy's, duh. And so because of that, I went with the theming of... This might be a little bit of a deep cut, but in the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, one of the stories takes place in a location called Freddy's Fantasy Water Park. Actually, the name changed in the story, but anyway, it started out as Freddy's Fantasy Water Park. So it's a Freddy Fazbear Entertainment water park. And I thought that was really fun, and that was a really cool theme, and that would allow me to draw a lot of fun compositions with, FNAF characters, water, summer, stuff. And so yeah, that's what I ended up doing with these pieces that I made. I ended up making 4 compositions, one of them which I was going to be rendering, and the other 3 I decided that were going to help me with another issue that I felt with my commissions. I felt that my commissions really didn't have much of a consistency throughout these few months back. I felt that in my previous monthly commissions, I felt a little lost. Even though I had a theme, I wasn't really consistent with what I was coming out with. The Christmas pieces, they felt very different from each other. The neon portraits, they felt very different from each other. although I was doing a team, they weren't like connected. They went into different directions. And so this time I wanted to display examples, not only to be examples of what the team was going to be like, but also something that the commissioners themselves could pick from, you know, and help them in like that decision process. A lot of times commissioners come to me, they don't really know what they want, you know. That's like most of the time. That if you are an artist that does commissions or is thinking about opening commissions, that is something you're gonna experience a lot. People aren't too sure on what they want, and it's up to you to make their ideas, the elements that they describe, it's up to you to create this composition that makes sense. And so I wanted to have already some examples, and I think they also will help me a lot, because I can always go back to them and think, oh yeah, this is what the theme, the concept is. I can't diverge from it too much. It's like a point of reference. It's something that I can always go back to clarify my mind and to allow me, oh, this is what we're going for. It's like a bass beat, a bass rhythm, whatever. I tried to do a music reference, but I don't know much of music to be talking about music. Anyway, often what I decide to do with the example pieces on my commissions is feature my friends' characters. It's very fun. I always love like choosing like, who am I going to pick this time? I pick at random. I'm like, okay, here's my list of friends. Who am I gonna pick today? Oh, maybe I'm gonna pick this person. So this time around, I picked my dear friend, Opera Shadow K. It's K, not Kai. They told me that. Opera Shadow K, my beloved friend. I decided to feature two of their OCs. Their beloved OCs, Ashley and May, having a day at the Freddy's Fantasy Waterpark. Ashley also brought her girlfriend, which you'll be seeing later. You're gonna see her. She is, you know, smoking hot. But anyway, I suppose since I'm doing a voiceover, I should go a little bit in detail of my process of the illustration, not just like talk about random stuff. I should also, you know, discuss a little bit of. So basically my whole process of illustration, I try to do things very simple or very like in a protocol sort of way. You know, you start out from the bottom and you work it up, you know. You start off from the larger pieces to the smallest details. That's, you know, the most efficient way for you to work as an artist. And it's something you will often hear from, you know, professionals. So you guys already saw I started out with drawing the compositions. I drew a few ideas. There wasn't much technical work behind like the way I did the compositions. I could have gone with like, oh, doing research of like different composition, like framing techniques, because those things exist. Like I can't think of any from the top of my head, but I didn't think of anything too much. I was just like, oh, this would be a really fun picture. So I sketched it out, and it's a little crazy. It's something with perspective. And so sketch done. What happens next? I started out blocking the shapes of the background, because that's something you need to start with first. Background is always first, because the characters that you're gonna draw are gonna be sitting in the background. They're gonna be in this world, so it's highly important for you to do the background first. I've done the mistake of drawing the characters first and then the background, and trust me, it is painful, because sometimes you might be drawing the character in one perspective and the background in another. So always draw the background first. The background here was very simple, but also still a lot elaborate. What I should have done first is that I should have come up with the design of how this park was going to be, but instead I just went ahead and started just like winging everything. I knew I wanted the slide and everything, so I just drew the shape of the slide, drew the shape of like the stairs leading to the slide, and then I was like, okay, there's a structure here. I drew the structure, and then I was like, what else? Because those were the only features that I had sketched out on this sketch, and then the rest I had to like figure it out. So I looked through a bunch of references. I was like, oh, maybe I should, you know, do more features that allow the viewer to understand like, oh, this is, you know, Freddy's Fantasy Waterpark. So I did a Freddy slide and a pizza. I drew a pizza there. Is this very FNAF? Okay, I'll be honest, this piece, I don't think you can see much FNAF into it, but it's in its heart, okay? But anyway, I started drawing a bunch of different things in like the distance. I drew like lounge chairs near like a pool. I drew sun umbrellas. I drew a little shack in the background. I was like, okay, this shack's, I don't know, it's like bathrooms, something. I was thinking like, what does a water park structure need? I wouldn't know. I never been to a water park, but I looked up a bunch of references and I was like, okay, that's awesome. Because that is the most important thing. If you don't know something, the internet is right there for you to look it up. Google is free. You know, you don't have to like make up something. You can always just refer to the internet and find solid reference. I always, with my work, try to find something to base myself on. Sometimes a little bit too much, but that's, you know, something to work out some other day. Anyway, with the basic shapes done, I did a little quick check on values just to see that if everything, all my bases were good. You know, usually when you're doing like a environment or really any like sort of picture that you're going to like go on and render, it's important for you to work with colors that are like stable and like well toned. That is really crazy to say because it's, in my mind it makes sense, but I don't think it like as an explanation it makes sense. So let me try to like come up with something. Usually you don't want the base colors that you just drew to be too dark or too bright, because if they are too dark or too bright, that means you can't really work up the different values. Of course, it changes depending on like what that element is. Like if it's the sky, then you most likely want it to be on a brighter side, or well, if it's a nighttime sky, you want it to be dark. But anyway, you know, you never want the values to be too similar because you want the elements to be able to stand out. And each color has different value. This is something really important. Each color has different value. Usually reds are colors that have very low value. They're very dark colors. Yellows are usually colors that have really high value. And blues are a little bit on the middle ground. Those are really important things to note, because when you're working with these colors, you need to understand how far you can drag them or you can stretch them. It's important for you to have middle ground values, I would say, as a base, because then you're going to go in and be changing these colors because you're going to be rendering them. So you're going to be doing shadows, you're going to be doing lighting, and these things can stretch the value to a different direction. So with yellows, you usually want a sort of middle ground yellows, because if you're going to be doing highlights on these yellow colors, it's going to become paler. And with red, if you're trying to darken it, you don't want the colors to look too murky, so you try to bring it to make it a very bright red. It's, you know, values are, art, although is a very human subject, a very sensible subject, I think art is a little bit of a science, and I think everyone needs to know that art is math. I think people don't talk about this enough, but art is the smartest subject in the world because it quite literally is the world. You need to understand physics, you need to understand social studies, you need to understand anatomy, you need to understand everything. It's everything. Art is the world, like I said, and people don't give enough credit for it. Anyway, I got a little deep there, but anyway. And so came the time for shading. So with the shading, the first round of it, I tried to go in a direction of like blocking out the different facets of something. I decided that the light was going to be coming from the top left of the composition, some, you know, obviously from the sky, from the sun, and it was going to be a very harsh light. It's a strong light because the sun, you know, is known for being a very powerful light. So this means the shadows that it's going to be casting are not going to be soft shadows unless, you know, there's some element in between. Sunlight is always going to be casting hard shadows, and I think that's very important for people to know. And where the light of the sun is not touching is being cast a shadow, and that shadow is going to be getting the light from the secondary light source, which is the sky, the atmosphere. Funny enough, I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand when they're doing like studies, is like, where the hell is the blue coming from? Because people see like, oh, if you're doing an outside picture, there's the sun, this very like white slash yellow color, and then there's the blue on the shadow, haha, and you have to draw with blue. Like, why do we draw with blue? It's very important for people to understand that that blue is the secondary light source, which is the sky. It's like bounce light almost. But anyway, because because the sky is blue, these shadows that the sun is not reaching are toned after the blue sky. And so that's, you know, what I did with the piece. Every facet that was not getting hit with sunlight is getting shifted towards the blue. So you see me picking the base color of the element that I'm drawing and shifting it towards the blue. Not only am I shifting towards the blue, but I'm also making it a slightly darker, and depending on the case, more saturated, more desaturated. It really is case to case, but I'm shifting to blue to represent this face of the object is not getting sunlight. This side of the object is not being hit by the sunlight. Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense, guys. I am trying to explain my logic behind it, but I'm going to be completely honest. Some of this is very automatic. Some of this is stuff that I, sit down and analyze for hours. You'll see this later with if I bring it up. I hope I bring it up. But later I'm going to be drawing the water, and there's a lot for me to say about water. Because I looked at too many pictures of water to understand how the material works. And so I go layer by layer, going through each element, and I'm shading the subjects, the elements, the objects, the structures, everything. And like I said earlier, with hard light, depending on the material, there is different dynamics. Some materials tend to receive light in a more spread out way, like plastic, like the plastic tubes in this case that you can see in the slides, and everything. They tend to receive light in a more softer way, but highlights are very defined. You'll see like a very bright defined spot that is the highlight. And this is something that I can go for hours, is how specular materials work. If you've worked with Blender or any sort of like engine that has materials, you probably have some understanding of like not qualities, the different mechanics that materials can have, such as like reflectiveness, specular, Fresnel, and diffuse, and all these different things. They should be common in like 3D modeling apps such as Blender, and it's something that as an artist I always keep the lookout for, because you'll see that a lot of what differentiates a material is how they react to light differently. Plastic, like the plastic tubes, they diffuse a lot of light and make the shadows very soft, but they receive a lot of highlight, which is, I guess, the specular. They receive it in a very defined corner, although they're round, but it exists. There is such a thing as a corner in a round subject, and it's fascinating. There is such a thing as an edge in a round subject. It's a very interesting thing that maybe I'll explain in some other case, because I'm running out of time. So a lot of my early work had been done in an app called Paint Tool Sci, which is a very neat, very good art app for beginners and everything. But eventually I saw myself outgrowing what the app allowed me to do, because I was heading towards a more conceptual line of work, and I was going to be doing a lot of like textures that I needed different tools for. And unfortunately, Paint Tool Sci is very limited in the tools that it can provide. And so because of that, I transitioned from that to Clip Studio Paint, which is an awesome app. It is amazing. I mean, there are still a lot of things that it could be better at, obviously, but it is such a amazing app for artists. There are so many tools at your disposal, many different things that you can do, such as gradient maps, the liquify tool, different brushes, the different mechanics for brushes. Because, for example, in Paint Tool Sci, you couldn't do that many different texture brushes. I mean, you did have a few texture brushes, but the ones that you did have, they didn't function in such a fancy way as more as like stamps. They really just felt like stamps or like something like that. They were very crude, you could even say. Is crude the right word? I don't know. Anyway, but Clip Studio Paint has so many incredible tools, and one of them is allowing you to make your own brushes. Wow! And it's something that I do a lot. It's something that I find to be so helpful, and you can really do brushes of like all sorts of things. I done ball pit brushes, something to allow me to draw a bunch of like ball pit balls in like quick succession. And oh my god, it's so handy. I done pearl brushes, I've done rails, I've done trash, I've done so many different brushes, and it's so handy because you can draw them in your style and use them in your style, and it's amazing. And for this project, I found myself creating a crowd brush, a brush with a bunch of different heads of like a crowd. Since I was going to be drawing like a lot of people waiting in line at the slide, I thought it would be done quicker if I had a bunch of heads to pull from, but I didn't want to have to grab individual PNGs and slap them and organize them. No, that's too slow. That takes too much work. So what did I do? I drew a bunch of heads and I created a brush. And so I could quickly draw a line of heads and people and have them be colored after the colors that I have picked out on my color wheel. It's so handy and it's so useful, and it was useful for this project. I did still have to do a lot of work with these heads because some of them weren't proportionally right, but this is a lot of like things that I just need to figure out, little kinks that to work out. And also like I still obviously need to put effort into the piece. I'm not just gonna use a brush and ooh, magically everything is done. Like obviously not. There's still a lot of refinement that you as an artist need to go back and do. One of the many other tools from Clip Studio is the 3D models, and it's something that I find it to be so handy. I mean, not so handy, it's handy, but sometimes a little fucked up. Sometimes it doesn't work too well. I mean, the models are good and fine as like some sort of reference, but I find myself sometimes met with frustration because the proportions that they have is very weird and like sometimes doesn't really fit my art style, but so I just use it as a base often to like pieces that have perspective and stuff like that, because guess what, perspective is really difficult. Yeah, even though I love perspective, not like other artists. No, I am like other artists. I am suffering from like a bunch of mental illnesses, if I'm being honest. But anyway, so I use a lot of the 3D models to help me with like different perspectives and things that I put in perspective. They're very handy, they're very helpful. But I use the 3D base, and then I draw using what anatomy knowledge I have, and you see me here doing that. And it's very useful. I mean, I started out drawing May, the little girl on the slide. I started out drawing her by hand, but then the perspective that I done wasn't working and I wasn't happy with it. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to get the 3D model to help me. But you're gonna see an issue, which is that Clip Studio Paint doesn't really have child proportions. You can tell the model to be short, but then it has a massive head, and for some reason it still has boobs. It still has boobs. And it's so weird. And so I had to change it to like a male model, but then it didn't work, and then I kept doing different like distances and different perspectives, because there is like a perspective grid, but it's not the best, because obviously the perspective that the app allows is going to be like a fixed perspective, a like straight perspective, when sometimes if you're drawing, sometimes you're gonna be like a round perspective. That's a lot. I don't know if you're gonna understand it. Perspective is chaos. Anyway, I went through like 4 different sketches of May until I was like, okay, this is good, I'm going to go with this. And so I drew her body. I used Liquify to attach an old sketched head to her, and I line arted her. Like I mentioned earlier, it's so important for you to have the background to base yourself on, because if I didn't have the background to base myself on, May would have probably been impossible to draw. I'm going to be completely honest, because the background became so important for the whole perspective thing and the final result of the piece, that if I hadn't drawn the background first, it would have been completely chaos. So once again on the whole protocol thing, because I started talking and I completely forgot. First, you do the sketch. That's when you decide everything in the composition, you decide where it is. Some people like to do value painting. That's something I did with some of the other compositions. Not so much with this one. I just like started winging it. You'll see later I'll talk about this, but I could have definitely used like some value mapping to help me with some of the elements and like organizing it. But anyway, then after the sketch, I go to do the background. I block out shapes with colors of the elements. I do like big shapes. I don't do too much detail because most of the detail that I do, I paint on, and that comes much later. And so once everything is blocked out, I tend to go two ways. Sometimes I sketch the characters, or like I did with this piece, I just went straight on to like rendering the background. And so you start painting the details of the background, going in, going out, you know, yada yada. And then you do the sketch for the characters. You clean the line art, sketch line, whatever. Clean the shapes. I mean, I do line art, so I'm gonna say I do line art, but there's people that paint characters, so whatever. Anyway, so you do the character, and then you start doing the flats of the character. You know, you block out its silhouette. Then you go in, you color in the different features of the character, and then you start rendering out. You do shading, you do lighting, you do texture. You usually start with texture. That's usually how I go. Texture is often on the base color. Hold on, I had the word. Okay, the texture is usually on the base color because you're gonna do shadows and lighting on top, and you want the shadows and lighting to, you know, affect the texture. Hey, look, there's Dolly. There's nothing wrong, repeat after me, there's nothing wrong from using Google Images on your art, especially if it's like not even like a main character, main focus thing. I went on what you called Sketchfab, found a model of Dolly, took a picture of it, and then slapped it on here. And then I alpha colored it the color of the crowd, and later on you're gonna see I did a lot of like, I render out a few like of the colors and things, but mostly you can see I worked with like screenshot of Dolly, which is really funny. You can see me struggling with another 3D character. I tried to like make this guy that is slowly coming into the crowd, and I like couldn't decide if I wanted line art because he was closer to the camera. By art logic, you should be seeing more details of him, right? In case you don't know, with like the hierarchy of art, you tend to want to draw things that are close to the point of view more detailed, and things that are further away with less detail. Obviously, this is not always the case. This is not always true. Some elements you can literally just draw with color, and people are most likely to read it as like something detailed, funny enough, because the brain fills in things, and it's, oh my god, once again, I'm going to too much psychology. Wrap it up. Okay. So basically, details that are far away, you draw with less details. Like, for example, I drew lounge chairs and trees in the background. I didn't draw them with any detail. I mostly draw them with like a solid color. For the trees, since, you know, they are a more like larger thing that you can tell the difference, I did do some like slight shading texture on it, but I didn't do like each individual leaf, you know, and it's important for you to know that. And then details that are up close, like the splash of waters, the guy that was walking into the line, can see them clearly, and so there are a few more details. Okay, maybe I'm giving the advice wrong. The advice is really that you should draw things more detailed where the area of focus is, you know? So, you know, May, she is very detailed compared to the crowd and background. Why is that? Because May is the protagonist of this piece. You know, in the composition, I decided May is going to be the focal point. And so the crowd behind her, you know, Dolly and these random people, they're just solid color. They don't need to be too detailed. And the background, even further back, the trees, the lounge chairs, I don't need to see their detail because they're so far away and they like are barely even noticeable. Because I also used value. I'm not gonna start talking about value again. Oh my god. But if you look it up and study, I might even talk about it later. I don't know. Can you tell that I'm slowly losing my mind? I feel like I was stiffer in the beginning of the video, and now I'm just slowly losing it, and it's true. Anyway, so with rendering, what I usually do after the base colors are set, I go in and I texture each element. If there's like skin, I usually go and do like red tints to show that there's blood. Eyes, I draw the eye details, you know, so on, skin details, that type of stuff. And then I do, on top of the textures, I do the shadow. You know what it is? It's the part of the object that is not being hit by the light, in this case the sun. And then after the shading, I go in and I do either lighting or bounce light. So with lighting, you obviously do the light that is hitting the subject. So in this case, it's the sunlight hitting the skin, basically diffuses a lot. So I did that. I did a lot of diffuse light on top of it. I didn't go too overboard because I didn't want her to look too bright. She's already a very pale child. The values on her are already very bright, so I didn't want to accidentally make her like full-on white value. So the bounce light in this case here is an object that it is getting hit by the main light, and that light is bouncing from the object and hitting our subject. So in this case, you're gonna see there's sunlight hitting the slide, the blue slide, and that blue color is being reflected back onto May and also Ashley in the background. The last few steps that I do some more adjustments. You can do paint overs. Some people paint over their drawings. That's crazy. I don't usually do it, but there's a lot of people that do. It's sometimes part of the rendering process, but anyway, I'm not gonna talk about that because I didn't do it. But I adjust some lights. I do some like gradient lights. That's something I love to do. That's something that is part of my routine of rendering characters. Highlights is very important. You do highlights on the edges and important features of your subject, so like the nose, the cheeks, the hair, you know. The way I render hair is very like winging it. That's a little crazy. I have a technique for it, but it feels like winging it. Basically, I draw the shape of the hair, the edges of the hairs with a soft brush. Not a soft brush, but an airbrush that has almost a hard edge. It's a little specific. And then I go in another layer. I draw a bunch of shapes that kind of look like hair, and it sort of gives this like shading gradient to the hair. And then on top of it, I draw with like a little opaque brush. I drew like the lightning bolts shines that I like in my style. And then on top of that, I do gradients on the shine. And then I do like a diffuse light on the hair. On this piece, the very last thing that I had drawn was the water, which was really difficult, but this is where my knowledge of materials really came in handy, and I'm going to try to explain how my thought process was behind the water, but goes a little bit into physics and, you know, once again, how light works, and so it might get a little elaborate, but hope you stick with me. So basically, as I was studying a bunch of the references and seeing like a bunch of different pictures of like slides and people sliding down them, I noticed that a lot of the water that was getting picked up looked white and reflective. Why is the water white? Why does the water look white? Because if you don't know this about water, but water has two very important features. It has no color and it has no taste. My science teacher told me that it didn't have taste, but I taste water. Anyway, so I noticed that the bubbles that were getting picked up from the slide were white. Why is that? So I think, I don't know this for sure, but my assumption is that these bubbles, these water droplets that were getting picked up are filled with air, and that air is making light catch on the water and make the water look white. If the source of light in this picture was a different color, then it would reflect that different color, but in this case, since it's the sun, it was reflecting white color. And, you know, that was the logic that I was following. The water is a very reflective material, highly reflective, and so when it gets hit by light, that edge that is facing the white light of the sun becomes very white. And that is the thought process behind the waves, for example. I did try to use a brush for the waves, but because of the perspective, it just wouldn't look right. And so I got a brush and I started painting on the faces, the water surfaces that were pointing towards the sun. That's basically what I did there. And because some of them are not really pointing to the sun, you know, there's some like nuance there. I erased some with a soft brush, but basically the whole idea was to make it like, oh, the whatever side is facing the sun is getting hit with with light. Whatever side is getting picked up and filled with air or waves, or because waves are interacting with air. Oh my god, physics. And so I did a lot of so those like bubbles and drops and things like that are very much white, because inside those drops of water there's a lot of air, and that air is causing a lot of like different surfaces to exist, and those different surfaces are reflecting the white. I hope I'm right and I'm not sounding too crazy, but basically I grabbed a very like texture brush, and for the drops, bubbles, whatever it's called, that May was picking up, I drew them with a texture brush, and I would softly erase and draw like circles to create this very like circular shape, to create this very like water drop wave that she creates. And honestly, the effect I think worked out perfectly. And yeah, the final details that I made was like the drops that were close to the camera. Once again, the faces facing the sun are white, and I did some reflections on the water, and I did some shines and shimmers which highlight the bubbles a little bit better. And then just to help with the focus of the picture, I decided to put a gradient behind May that would allow the background to be more diffused and help focus on May as the protagonist of this picture. And so came the final details, adjusting a few different colors from the background, things that I taken in a different direction, did some changes here and there. And then comes the post-processing. With the post-processing, I usually tend to do different things every time. With this piece in specific, I decided to merge everything together into a different layer and take that layer and blur it to create this sort of like misty feel to the picture, and then just put in a low opacity. And then I flattened everything again, and I did a layer, but instead of blurring it, I decided to do chromic aberration, which gives this like nice digital feel to the picture. It makes like this colored edge thing. Lastly, I added a noise layer to the background and then to the characters, just to help with some of like vague textures. And I tried a few different things, but didn't work, and well, that was it. Final thoughts of the picture. I am very happy with the results. It turned out exactly as I imagined. If there were a few things for me to note, is that I think the composition could have been structured a little bit better. At the end there, I realized that May was too far on one side of the picture and she could have been centered a little bit better. But overall, I think the results are awesome. I think everything worked amazing. And yeah, if you guys wanted to see more videos like this, speed arts with voiceover on top of it, you are welcome to join my Patreon. For $5, you can join the Loyal Goober membership, and you'll get access to more of these voiceover speed art videos, as well as a 15% discount on my commissions. Yay! And for $3, you can sign up for the Baby Goober membership, in which you'll be getting access to sneak peeks, blog posts, like one that I did recently was talking about the beta designs for the Glam Droids, show a bunch of pictures that you guys never seen, and discuss stuff, and early access to my commission slots. And so, if that is something that you are interested, feel free to check out my Patreon at Valentin Gallo. The link is in the description. I love you all. Thank you for watching. See you on the flip side.